Hello everyone, Books with Banks back again with another book review, and today I will be reviewing Nnedi Okorafor's novel Who Fears Death. And a few notes before I get into this review. First and foremost, I really want to give a huge shout out and thank you to Johanna. Her channel is linked in the description. She's the one who recommended this book to me. Not to give too much away about my review, but yes, it was definitely worth shuffling around my TBR a little bit for her recommendation. Thank you so much, Johanna. Then number two, I will stay relatively vague and spoiler-free for the first part of this review, and I'll clearly signal when I shift over into talking about more specific spoilers. Number three, kind of notes. If you like my channel, maybe my review style, or anything like that, and you haven't already, it would mean a lot if you could, share this video with friends and family who might be interested in this book. Also, if you haven't, it would really help me out if you could subscribe to the channel. So thank you. And then the fourth kind of note I want to bring up before getting into the review. This book can be a very difficult read. Beyond just dealing with things like racism and sexism, there's quite a lot of sexual violence against women depicted here. I will do my best to be as respectful as I can, and I'll try to handle my discussion of these issues responsibly. I just ask, everyone commenting down below, I just ask that everybody follows suit or also treats these very serious issues with an appropriate level of respect. Alright, so Who Fears Death was written by Nnedi Okorafor. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, but I believe that's it, Nnedi Okorafor. And it was published by Daw Books in 2010. I've just read this 10th anniversary edition. This book tells the story of a young girl named Anya Sonwoo, or Anya for short. And again, I really do apologize if I'm getting some of these pronunciations wrong. But Anya is kind of how I read it in my head, and Anya is coming of age, and she's coming to terms with the kind of racist, or not kind of, the extremely racist, sexist, genocidal world of a region in post-apocalyptic Africa that she's kind of growing up in. All the while, she's coming to terms with her own magical powers and magical abilities. We have here a relatively small cast of characters, beginning with friends, family, and teachers in the village Anya grows up in, and then we shift away partway through into a story about a small group of these characters accompanying Anya on a quest of sorts. The book deals with themes of generational trauma, the oppression of female sexuality, colorism, fighting violence with violence, the nature of life and death in the spirit world, and of course, what it's like fearing one's own death. There's also a lot about fulfilling our roles in society, no matter how unjust said society is, kind of fighting against that, where the opposite would be combating that idea and rewriting the major tenets of the society to be more equitable in the first place. That's a major idea here. Also, there's a lot about witnessing atrocities and horrors and at least responding in some way, not just sweeping these things aside or sweeping these things under the rug and saying like, oh, that happens way over there, it's not going to affect me. This book's a lot about avoiding that kind of type of thinking. The world building is handled very carefully, I think. Okorafor sprinkles in bits of technology and references to the world long ago, all references to things common in our modern day world. The magic is also left it's left very mysterious. There are specific techniques and magical abilities our characters can train in and master. However, the mechanics of all of this are left pretty mysterious and open to interpretation. There are wonderfully creative magical ideas in here that were totally unfamiliar to me, as I'm more familiar with fantasy stories, a lot of fantasy that kind of stem from European or medieval European or even like Roman, that kind of feeling, that kind of setting type of fantasy. And those are stories where magic draws heavy inspiration from the legends of that continent. So reading a fantasy in which the magic is inspired by different legends in a different region of the world, different philosophies, I think it makes this book really stand out. As for some spoiler-free criticisms or things that didn't work for me as much, Okorafor introduces this idea early on of a racist idea that many people in this world hold, that mixed race children are naturally prone to more violence, ignoring the fact, or to committing more violent acts. Ignoring the fact that these children and people are often the victims of a lot of violence. Over the course of this story, this idea evolves into a constant question between a couple of our main characters of whether or not it's appropriate for them to respond violently to racist hate and sexual assault. While I love Okorafor's exploration of this idea, I also felt that there were a few missed opportunities to see more perspectives, particularly from victims of two separate times. One of our main characters kind of magically attacks a large groups of people. Again, I'll leave it pretty vague though. If you've read the book, you probably can guess one or two of the scenes I'm talking about. I think I was hoping to see at least a little bit more conversation around each of those attacks, whether from the victims or even just our core group of characters kind of discussing the aftermath, maybe a little bit more than we saw them discussing it. I also really enjoyed the learning magic kind of training part of the book, and that acted kind of as this extended final section of Nnedi growing up in her village, but I felt at times we'd skip through several years and now our characters are much more grown up and much better at magic all of a sudden. I think I just really liked that first part of the book so much, that coming of age, and eventually that kind of magical training part, that I wish we'd spent a little bit more time there than we ultimately did. In particular with a character named Aro, who I found very intriguing. There's not much else I can say without spoiling a lot of stuff, so I think I'll end this spoiler-free section with this. It's a terrific novel, extremely original and creative, but also a painful read at times because of the atrocities Okorafor doesn't shy away from describing. But every time something like that happens, I think she is really good at pulling us in with the question of what will the answer be to this terrible crime? What will the victims or the survivors' response be? What are our characters going to do about these atrocities? It's not just depicting them just to depict them. You know, it's always sort of in conversation with the characters' actions and their potential responses. So there you have it, a great book, and thank you for watching up to this point if you haven't read it and if you're avoiding spoilers, but now we'll talk about spoilers, so here's your spoiler warning. Okay, so first and foremost, I want to talk about something this book explores that is still a terrifying problem in many cultures around the world, and that's female circumcision, one name for it, or genital mutilation, the ritual cutting away of the clitoris for young girls. Obviously, this has very sexist implications, all tied to societies trying to control their women by getting rid of their emotional urges and impulsiveness. Of course, this is ridiculous, horrible, but it happens, and Okorafor takes things one step further, this being a fantasy novel. And as a fantasy or sci-fi author can, she makes it so the scalpel used to cut the clitoris actually has a magic or juju on it to make any kind of sexual activity afterward extremely painful for these girls until they're married. And I think stuff like this is a really great way that Okorafor explores the sexist implications of female circumcision by making those implications much more literal and much more clear and focused. And I think it's a great way to make sure readers don't just gloss over something like this. Also, I want to mention that our main character doesn't have to volunteer for this cultural practice, but she does because she's already hated and seen as an outcast for her race. and she feels like she already brings shame to her family. So she seeks out another, more unhealthy and frightening way to fit in. And I love that Okorafor is including this idea as well, that people who are oppressed in one way, shape, or form may find other slightly unhealthy ways to fit in. Sounds like too light of a term. It sounds like we're talking about kids at school, which, I mean, these are, but this is obviously a much bigger kind of cultural thing than just fitting in class, Anyway, also, actually, one more thing about the circumcision. I know it can be a bit uncomfortable, but if you've read the book, then you know how central this aspect is to the events and to the dynamics of the main group of friends. So I do want to add that I really love that Okorafor gives Onye the magical ability to grow back the clitorises of her friends, or herself and her friends, and that healing ability. I think it's a really magical, powerful moment in the book. Obviously, it leads to kind of a lot of drama and stuff, but just the fact that that's what a character can do with magic in this world, I think, I don't know, that was very powerful. I also want to point out how Okorafor integrates another difficult topic into this story, and this is rape during genocide, or rather, sexual violence as a weapon of genocide. And I think Okorafor portrays the devastating effects of such crimes very clearly. The attackers are merging races, canceling out possibility of more descendants, male bloodlines for the victim group, the victim culture, and replacing them with their own descendants. That sort of warped genocidal kind of idea with biology and stuff. Also, this all continues whenever rape is used as part of genocide. This is always going to demoralize and dehumanize the oppressed group even further. Okorafor presents this brilliantly through the eyes of a young girl learning about these atrocities having happened to her mother. She learns about this at a young age, and then she has to live with them, and she has to grow up knowing these things, and she goes through, I guess, a few crises and forces others to witness and experience what she's had to live with all her life, knowing that this horrible thing happened to her mother. I think, and again, that's another way that Okorafor uses her magic to really, uses the magic in this book to really offer a beautiful and powerful response to atrocity. On that note, I think I'm trying to say, all in all, that this book works so well for me, and none of the sexual violence or violence against women really seems out of place or inappropriate to include here, because so much of the story is about children becoming more and more aware of the violence in their worlds, and because we're right there along with them, we, the audience, are forced to sit with these really terrible, unsettling atrocities and probably think about these things a lot more than we would in our everyday lives. And most importantly, we're thinking about these things through the point of view of the victims and the survivors instead of the perpetrators. I think that's always excellent whenever we approach genocide. It's not just, how big was this army? What tactics were used? What's the map look like? How many civilians killed? What was the purpose of this tank? Or how did that gun work? It's not these very technical, surface level, kind of factual, statistical analyses of atrocity. A story like this takes the statistics and facts of atrocity that everyone reads about in high school and transforms those things into an emotional and engaging narrative that actually, I think, helps us a lot more trying to understand what victims of these crimes actually went through and what they go through on a daily basis, even after the fact, and even what their descendants kind of what their descendants feel about these things. And yes, those sections I alluded to above that I felt there were missed opportunities. To be clear, I'm referring to a few spots. I'm referring to when Anye blinds an entire village because a mob attacks them and someone throws a brick and kills her friend. If you read it, you'll remember that scene. And then at the end, there's this wondrous and like terrifyingly powerful magic release that happens with the killing of all the fertile men and impregnating all the women in this one city. And I'm not gonna lie, I would have liked to see a little bit more discussion around those events, more characters' reactions. Even our main character, I would have liked to sit in her mind reflecting on these things a little bit more than we did because they are such big, like, impactful moments, presumably for those different cities and those different groups. Maybe even like I would have liked a discussion about, continuing this idea, fighting violence with violence. She knows people like her or with her skin color from the two different races, the darker skin and the lighter skin. There's a stereotype that they're violent. I'd like to have heard a little bit more about her reflecting on what her violence then is that contributing to the stereotypes. And obviously we want all of the hate to stop, right? It's a very difficult kind of thing to discuss because I don't think anyone reading this book, when you get to these scenes, I don't think we really feel like chastising her. Like, we don't feel like she's in the wrong necessarily for doing these things. And a lot of times her sort of like ignorance with the magical abilities leads to these reactions causing maybe a lot more harm than she intended. But yeah, I think those kind of events, those wide scale like reactions, kind of violent reactions, I think would have liked to sit with those a little bit more and dive a little deeper into our characters' reactions to their own actions, if that makes sense. And on that note, maybe I would have liked to see maybe even a little bit more about the myth-making process and how Anye is building this sort of legend and epic narrative and myth around herself. We get some of that, but Okorafor made me really eager for more of that kind of... made me eager for even more of that. Something else I didn't love was that Muita's Muita. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Onye's love interest. His trainer or teacher turned out to be Onye's biological father. I'm never the biggest fan of when we have like villains in a story and it's like one of the twists partway through is, oh, it turns out your villain is my villain. I feel like that simplifies things a little bit too much for my liking. When the world is depicted as so evil and wicked, I think it could have been nice to just see, yeah, it's not just one figurehead making everything so rotten. There's just a lot of rotten people there. I think I prefer when the heroes have different individuals that hurt them in the past, and they can they don't have to challenge just one person and kind of be done with it. They kind of have to, they have their own demons that they have to deal with. They can help each other deal with each other's demons, but I'd rather those demons remain separate and not wind up being the same person, if that makes sense. Other things I love, though. I love the Va people, I think is what they were called. There's the moving tribe of people who live in a sandstorm, a magical kind of protective sandstorm in the desert. I loved also the tender and mature sort of treatment of animals and wildlife in the desert. I also love the idea that to be truly in tune with your magic and to pass initiation, you have to see your own death. I love how this ties into the themes of the book and the ending, and I really did love the ending. I love this mysterious conclusion with how the chapters themselves and the structure sort of unravels there. Is it like, but here's what really happened? Or here's what she hoped would happen, or here's what happened in the first book originally, but Anya, the character within the story, rewrote this story. So then is the book that they've been looking for sort of in a way this book that we've been reading? All such intriguing questions right at the end, kind of like, I really, really love that. But I think Okorafor pulled off raising these questions without answers, without making it frustrating. And I think it just invites such rich conversations. And for that matter, the whole book invites really, I don't want to say fun conversations necessarily, but really important and deep conversations. So, all that said, again, it was a tough book to read, a little tough to review, so I hope I conveyed my thoughts effectively. But I think that should do it for my spoiler-free and spoiler-filled kind of combined book review of Nnedi Okorafor's Who Fears Death. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.